This video is on direct and inverse proportion. So this is all about how two different things are related to each other. If they are related to each other by direct proportion, that means that one is multiplied by something to get the other. If it's inverse proportion, if that's the way that they're related, then they're related because of some form of dividing. So normally in the exam, the first thing you're asked to do is to find an equation connecting, I've said y and x here, but they could pick any two letters or make it a real life problem and any two words then. So they could be asking you to find an equation connecting y and x. So you start with the direct or inverse basic equation. So if you're told that it's direct proportion, you multiply, inverse proportion, you divide. And then it just depends, this equation, it just depends on what way you're told that they're related to each other. So if you're just told that y is directly proportional to x, then you write down y equals kx. If it's directly proportional to x squared, then you write down y equals kx squared. Also for direct proportion, they don't necessarily have to use the word direct. If they just say proportion, you're expected to know that you just assume that it's direct proportion rather than inverse. So direct proportion or just proportion both mean multiply. If you're told that it's inverse proportion, that's to do with dividing. So y is inversely proportional to x, looks like that. And y is inversely proportional to the square of x would look like that. A letter that you'll notice here that keeps coming up in every equation is the letter k. They use the k for a constant. I don't know why they use the letter k, because constant begins with a C, but they use the letter k. So every equation that you have at the start will have the letter k in it. And you'll write either something like one of these four. They will also give you some other numbers, and you use the numbers they give you in the question and substitute them into the equation. So they'll tell you a y and x value that do work, and you substitute them into the equation and then rearrange it to get k. And remember, it's a bit like solving equations, so if you change sides, you change signs. So you start off with a basic equation. They'll give you values for y and x that work. You slot them in, substitute them in, rearrange it, work out what k is, and then you write the equation out again with k replaced by the number that you just found it to be. And then you'll normally get an equation that looks a wee bit like one of those four. So the k will disappear. Once you find it, you put the number in instead of the k. So something like y equals 5x, or d equals 3e squared, p equals 100 over q, a equals 20 over b cubed. You will end up with an equation something like that. After that then, sometimes that's all they ask you to do in the equation. Just find, all they ask you to do in the question. Just find an equation that connects these two things and you just leave your answer like that. But most of the time they then ask you to go on and use the formula or the equation that you just worked out. So you can then substitute into this equation to find values of x or y depending on what you're given. And then be careful whenever you're rearranging. Sometimes if you're going in reverse, you'll need a square root and a cube root if the equation initially had a squared and a cubed in it. So that's a lot of information to take in one go. So if we get some questions here, you might actually see how these work. So question 1, these few questions here are all on direct proportion, so your starting equation will all have a multiplying sign in them. So y is, just going to highlight the important bits here, y, and then directly proportional, and then square of x. So those are the three important bits in that first sentence. So y equals, and then direct proportion means k times, and then the square of x is x squared. So that's your starting equation. That means y is directly proportional to the square of x. If it had said inversely proportional, then you would do k divided by x squared. You don't necessarily have to have that multiplying sign in there. You can leave it without a multiplying sign. The same as with algebra, normally you can ignore the multiplying sign and just put the letters beside each other. Then the next bit of the question is the bit where they give you the two values that actually work. So they have said that whenever y is equal to 5, x is equal to 4. So these two values work in this connection. So if you put y equal to 5, so change y to 5. And if you put x equal to 4, so change x into a 4. then you should be able to work out what k is. So I'm just going to write this out again, but change the 4 squared into 16. So I'm going to rearrange this now. It didn't actually ask me to find an equation connecting y and x, but you have to find the equation connecting them before you can go on and answer the rest of the question. So 5 equals k times 16. So to get k on its own then, you move the times 16 over to the far side and divide by 16. That's a bit like solving equations. Whenever you change sides, you change signs. So on the calculator then, do 5 divided by 16. So 0.3125 is what k is worth. So 0.3125 is the value of k. And now you put k, that number, back in here and get rid of the letter k now. So y equals 0.3125x squared. And we've now got an equation connecting y and x. So y is directly proportional to the square of x. You start with your basic equation, you use the numbers that they've given you, slot them in, rearrange them, get a number for k, and then actually use that number. You don't want the final equation to still have a k in it, you want it just to have y and x. Okay? Now that we've got that equation, we can use it to actually answer the question. So find the value of y whenever x is equal to 8. So I'm going to write the equation out again. And I want to know what y is worth whenever x is 8. So I'm going to put x equal to 8. So I'm going to replace this x with an 8. So y equals 0.3125. Remember that means times 8 squared. So I've still got the 0.3125 in my calculator, so I'm just going to times it by 8 squared. So that gets me 20. So y equals 20. So that would be your final, oh, whoops, knocked the camera over. That's what happens whenever you've got too many things sitting out on your desk. So that's your answer there then, y is equal to 20. Okay, so all of this working out over here was just for me to get an equation connecting y and x, and then over this side is me actually using the equation, substituting in the numbers to get the answer that they're looking for. So question 2 then. Rugs are made in different sizes. The price P, so that's the first letter we're going to be using, of a rug is proportional to, so directly proportional to, the square of its width. And then a rug costing £32 is 80 centimetres wide, so that's them giving you two values that will actually work in this connection. So the first thing you need to do is write down your basic equation. So the letters this time are P equals K times, because it says proportional, which means direct proportion, and then the square of its width would be W squared. So that's the starting equation this time, a bit like the last one, but this question is about real life. It's actually to do with the price of rugs. So that's your starting equation, and then you substitute in the numbers that they've given you. So a rug costing £32, so that would be the price, is 80 centimetres wide. So the 80 would be the W then. So I'm going to substitute in 32 instead of P, and then go over and put 80 in instead of the W. After that then, I'm going to change the 80 squared to what 80 squared actually is, the 6,400. Then rearrange it to get K on its own. I would bring that over to the far side and divide by 6,400. So it's going to be quite a small number, I think. So 32 divided by 6,400. My calculator is saying 5 times 10 to the power of minus 3. So they've given the answer in standard form because it's so small. So that would be K is equal to 0.005. So the calculator just gave me the answer in standard form. There's a wee small times by 10 there, if you can see it. So 5 times 10 to the power of minus 3 is the same as 0.005. So that's the value of K then. So I can now put it back into the equation so that my equation only has the letter P and W in it. So now I've found my equation, and that's all they were asking me for in part A, just find an equation connecting P and W. And then part B says what is the cost of a rug with a width of 100 centimeters. So I can use the formula that I've just worked out, and they're saying whenever the width is 100, so if I put W equal to 100 here, so the price will be 0.005 times 100 squared. So I've still got that number in my calculator, times it by 100 squared gets 50. So the cost of a rug with a width of 100 centimeters, it would cost £50. Okay, so that's our answer for part B. Then part C, a rug costs £18, so they're telling you the price this time, and they want you to work out the width of this rug. So we use the same equation. The price is equal to 0.05 multiplied by the width squared. So that's the equation connecting the two of them. And this time I'm putting P equal to 18. So replace or substitute 18 in instead of the P. And then this is 0.005 times W squared. So for me to rearrange this, to be able to find the width and get it on its own, I need to bring the times by 0.005 over to the far side and divide by 0.005. So 18 divided by 0.005 gets me 3,600. 3,600. But that's for W squared, and that's not the width of the rug, that's the width of the rug squared. So W then would just be equal to the square root of 3,600. So the square root, so just press the square root button and equals, gets you 60. So the width of the rug, if the rug costs £18, the width of the rug would be 60 centimeters. Okay, you'll see with these questions that you follow the same sort of method over and over and over for each one. Writing down your formula, using the numbers, substitute them in, work out what K is, put it back in, get an equation without K, and then use it a couple of times. Question 3 then. This question is to do with salt. So salt is sold in different sized blocks. The weight of each block, B, is directly proportional to the cube of the height, H. So the weight of the block is directly proportional to the cube of its height. A block of weight 54 kilograms has height 3 meters. Find an equation connecting H and B. So they're telling you that whenever W is 54, oh no, the weight, why do they use B for the weight? You think they would have used a W? I'm using the wrong letters here. So the weight of each block is B. So here, if the weight is 54, that means B is 54. And then the height is 3, means that H is 3. So that's them giving you the two numbers that work in the equation, but you need to start off with your basic equation first. So you're told B, directly proportional, cube of the height. So B, directly proportional means K times, and then the cube of the height means the height cubed. So that's your basic equation. Then put B equal to 54. Leave K for a minute. We need to work it out. And then H cubed would be 3 cubed. Then leave the 54, leave the K, change the 3 cubed to 27. Then rearrange by bringing that times by 27 over and dividing by 27. So 54 divided by 27. Just going to check, it is definitely 2, yes it is 2, so you might actually be able to do this question without a calculator. We'll see how we go. So K is equal to 2, and then I can substitute that back in. So B is equal to 2 times H cubed, or B equals 2H cubed if you want to write it without the times there. They'll not mark you wrong if you've got the times. Okay, so that's the formula then, that's the equation connecting H and B. So the weight of the block is equal to 2 times the height cubed. So find the weight of a block with a height of 1 meter. So find the weight means work out what B is. whenever the height is 1 means that h is equal to 1. So write out the formula that we're going to use. B equals 2h cubed. So B is what we're wanting to find, and it's equal to 2 times 1 cubed. So that would be 2 times 1. You don't do 2 times 1 is 2 and then do 2 cubed to get you 8. You would cube the 1 first, so 1 cubed is 1, and then times it by 2. So you end up with 2 kilograms would be the weight of the block. So you need to just be careful there that you do the substitution in the right order. So 2h cubed means do the h cubed and then times by 2. If they wanted you to times by 2 first, that would have ended up in a bracket there. Then part C, another block has a weight of 128, so that means that B is 128 and they want you to find the height. So using the same equation, so B equals 2h cubed means that B is 128 and that's equal to 2 times whatever the height cubed is, and we want to find the height. So you need to get the height on its own by bringing that times by 2 over and divided by 2. So 128 divided by 2 gets you 64. And that's the height cubed. So we have been able to do all this without a calculator so far. So this last bit you're also able to do without a calculator because 64 is one of the square numbers you should know. So it's just what cubed. I think I said square number there, it's a cube number. So you need to work out what cubed gets you 64. So you would do h is equal to the cube root of 64, which is just 4. So the height would be 4 meters then, would be your final answer for that one. Okay, one more question on direct proportion, and then I've got a few questions on inverse proportion. So this one, it's not a problem type question. We've already had a question there on salt and one to do with rugs. So this one is just a random one to do with just letters. So W and P are both positive quantities, so they just mean that they are positive numbers. W is directly proportional to the square root of P. So W directly proportional square root of P. So that's your starting equation. W equals direct proportion means K times the square root of P. Then they give you the two numbers to use. When W is equal to 12, so put 12 in instead of W. P is 16. Looks like we're going to be able to do this one without a calculator, well this first bit anyway, because we know that the square root of 16 is 4. Just put that square root back in again, I meant to get rid of the square root. So the square root of 16 is just 4, and now bring the times by 4 over and divide by 4. So 12 divided by 4 means that K would be equal to 3. And now put 3 back in here instead of the K. So W equals 3 times the square root of P, or leave the multiplying sign out and write it as W equals 3 root P. That's not the cube root of P, that's not a wee tiny 3 there. It's 3 times the square root of P. So that's express W in terms of P. That's just another way of saying work out an equation for W and P, involving W and P. So this is the formula then that we're going to use for the rest of the question. So W equals 3 times the square root of P. I'm just going to put that times back in. What is the value of W whenever P is equal to 25? So change P into 25. So 3 times the square root of 25 would be 3 times, and then the square root of 25 is 5. So W works out as 15. So that was an easy one. Haven't needed to use a calculator yet, so this was probably on a non-calculator paper. The last bit then, using the same formula, 3 times the square root of P, and this time we want to know the value of P whenever W is equal to 21. So put 21 in there instead of the W, equals 3 times the square root of P. Bring the times by 3 over to try to get the P on its own. So 21 divided by 3 gets you 7. So 7 is equal to the square root of P. So for you to get P on its own, you would bring the square root over, and the opposite of a square root is a squared. So 7 squared is equal to p, so that means that p must be equal to 49. Okay, that's the end of the direct proportion question. So I've got a few here on inverse proportion. So these ones all start off with a k divide or a k over. So question 1, the number of days, highlight these again. So the number of days, D, to complete a project is inversely proportional to the number of people who work on the project. The project takes 18 days to complete. If 150 people work on it, find an equation connecting D and P. So D, it's good, get start. D, not P. D is equal to, inversely proportional means K divide, and it just says that it's inversely proportional to the number of people. So it's just a P that goes on the bottom. It didn't say the square of the people or the cube of the people or the square root of the people. So it's just D equals K over P, or K divided by P. Then you're told the project takes 18 days, so that's D is 18 to complete if 150 people work on it. So they're just telling you there that whenever D is equal to 18, P works out at 150. So we slot those numbers in, and that should help us find K. So D equals 18 equals K divided by 150. So then to get the K on its own, we bring the divide by 150 over and do the opposite, so times by 150. So 18 times by 150 gets you 2,700. So K equals 2,700. Once you've worked out what K is, then you can put it back into this equation, keep the D, keep the P, and change the K. So D equals 2,700 divided by P. So that's the equation then that we're going to be using in the rest of the question. So how many people are needed to complete the project in 10 days? So 10 days means whenever D is equal to 10. So D equals 2,700 divided by P. So we want to know what P is whenever D is 10. So replace D with 10. So we want to work out 2,700 divided by what gets you 10. So you can swap the 10 and the P round and do that P is equal to 2,700 divided by 10, which means that P is equal to 270. This wee bit here, it looks a wee bit confusing. It's just a quicker way of doing it if you just swap those two over, where it actually comes from. So if I go back to just this bit again, 10 equals 2,700 divided by P. I would need to get the P away from the bottom of that fraction. So I would bring it up over there and I would have 10 times P equals 2,700. And then for me to get P on its own, I would bring the 10 over there and divide by 10. So I would end up with 2,700 divided by 10 then. So instead of having to write all of that out, if you get to a stage like this where the letter that you're looking to find is on the bottom of the fraction, just swap it with that one, and it'll save you doing this, bringing that up and over in times, bringing that over in divide. Just swap them round and I'll get you to your answer a wee bit quicker. So that's the answer for that one. You would need 270 people working on the project if you wanted to get it done in 10 days. Question 2 then. So Y is inversely proportional. Let me get the highlighter here. Y is inversely proportional to the square root of x. So your starting equation would be Y inversely proportional means K divide, and then the square root of x would go on the bottom. Then they give you two numbers that work, and then you would need to use these two to get the equation, work out what K is, and then go on to answer the rest of the question. So I'm going to use these two numbers here first. So I'm going to put x equal to 16 and y equal to 2. So put a 2 in there, equals K over the square root of 16. And I know the square root of 16 is 4, so K over 4. And then bring the over 4, or divide by 4, over to the far side and times by 4. So I've worked out then that K is equal to 8. So then I can put 8 in there instead of the K. So Y equals 8 over the square root of x. So that's our equation connecting y and x then. And I'm now going to use this to work out what is the value of y whenever x equals 0.25. So I'm going to put x equal to 0.25 in there. So y equals 8 over the square root of 0.25. I have a feeling that this one was from a non-calculator paper, because you're actually able to work out the square root of 0.25 without a calculator. So it's what times what gets you 0.25. If you ignore the 0 point, 5 times 5 gets you 25. So 0.5 times 0.5 gets you 0.25. So 0.5 times 0.5. You would do 5 times 5 gets you 25, and then because you've got two numbers after the point, you need two numbers after the point there, so you would get 0.25. So then the square root of 0.25 takes you back to the 0.5. So 8 divided by 0.5 actually gets you 16, because that means 8 split up into halves, and you need 2 halves every time to make up one whole number. So you would need 16 halves to make up the 8. So y equals 16 would actually be your final answer for that one. Okay, I think that did come from a non-calculator paper, so this bit here was okay. Just these two bits here at the end were quite complicated, but you should be okay. You should be able to work with your square roots, and you should be able to deal with 8 divided by 0.5 as well. Number 3 then, it's the last one. The illumination L provided by a torch is inversely proportional to the square of the distance d from the torch. And then they give you two numbers that work for L and D. So find an equation expressing L in terms of D. So first of all, you would start with L equals inversely proportional means K divide, and then the square of D would be D squared. Then they've told you whenever L is 2, D works out to be 10. So replace L with a 2, replace the D with a 10. So 2 equals K over, and then 10 squared is 100. So bring your divide by 100 up over there, and we're about to write times by 200. I'm going ahead to what the answer would be. Bring your divide by 100 up over there and times by 100. So you get 200 equals K, or K equals 200, whichever way you want to write it at the end. Once you've worked out that K is equal to 200, replace it in that equation with a 200. So L equals 200 divided by D squared. So that is our equation expressing L in terms of D. Means you want L and then the D over on the other side. So that's the equation we're going to be using then for the rest of the question. So L equals 200 divided by D squared. Find the value of L whenever D is 2. So I'm going to put a 2 in there. L equals 200 divided by 2 squared. 200 divided by and 2 squared is 4. And then 200 divided by 4, I can ignore that naught. 20 divided by 4 gets me 5, and then put the naught back on gets me 50. So again, I've been able to do all of this question without a calculator. Then part C, find the value of D when L is equal to 8. So I need that original equation again. L equals 200 over D squared. So find the value of D whenever L is equal to 8. So put 8 in there, equals 200 over D squared. And this is a bit like, where was that last question? A bit like the first inverse proportion one, where the letter that I was looking to find was on the bottom. So to get it out on its own, I could just swap those two round. So the same thing happens here. For me to get the D squared out on its own, I can just swap those round and do D squared equals 200 divided by 8. So 200 divided by 8, you can either do a proper sum, or dividing by 8 is the same as dividing by 2 and then dividing by 4. So 200 divided by 2 gets you 100, divided by 4 gets you 25. So 200 divided by 8 works out to be 25. But that's D squared, not D. So to get D, you would need to square root the 25 then. So then D is equal to 5. Okay, that's the end of direct and inverse proportion. Hopefully that has been slightly helpful.